Most people think they know what love looks like in bed. They think it's about touches and words and meaningless "I love" yous muttered in the dark. But let me tell you the truth, no one's ever dared to say to your face, because when a man's love is genuine, when it's not performative, when it's not ego-driven or lust-based, his entire biology, his deepest psychology, and his suppressed emotional conditioning as an avoidant attachment-type war against his fences in those intimate moments, and his actions betray the truths words can't admit. When an avoidant man's love is genuine, something happens in those moments of intimacy that no relationship book, no Hollywood movie, and no surface-level advice column will ever have the guts to tell you, because what takes place inside him during those moments is a war between everything he was trained to believe about vulnerability and the primitive, ancient part of his nervous system that can no longer deny what's real. Most people will tell you to listen to his words, to look for his gestures, but the truth is words lie, rehearsed behaviors deceive, and anyone can fake affection, but the body never lies, the nervous system never lies, and when an avoidant man loves you, his entire biology will betray the very walls he spent a lifetime building. In lovemaking, it's never about the practiced moves. It's about the moments he can't control, the reflexes he can't suppress, and the instincts he's too overwhelmed to disguise. And the first of those is the way he slows down. And I'm not talking about the deliberate kind of slowing down that some man reads about in a magazine or copies from a film scene. I'm talking about the involuntary, terrified, awestruck kind of slowing down that happens when, for the first time in his life, he's face to face with someone who has the power to see through every layer of performance he's ever worn. You'll notice it in the way he hesitates before he touches you, not because he's unsure of what he wants, but because the gravity of what's about to happen shakes the ground beneath his carefully constructed detachment. You'll feel it in the way his breathing changes, no longer steady and measured like a man in control, but uneven, jagged, interrupted by the weight of emotions he doesn't know how to name. Because to an avoidant man, genuine intimacy isn't pleasurable at first, it's dangerous, it's threatening, it's a confrontation with every ghost of abandonment, betrayal, and rejection he buried deep in his psyche. And yet here he is, moving slower, holding back not because he's disengaged, but because for the first time in years, maybe his entire life, he cares too much. And that is a terrifying thing for a man who's trained his belief caring is a liability, because if he cares, if he loves, he can be left. If he's seen, he can be destroyed, and still his body slows, his touch softens, not performative softness, but trembling reverence, the kind of touch reserved for things so fragile and sacred that breaking them would feel like blasphemy. What no one teaches you is that when an avoidant man is physically intimate with someone he doesn't love, it's mechanical, it's detached, it's fast, it's about control, it's about maintaining distance beneath the illusion of closeness. But when love is involved, he's no longer the one steering the ship. His biology takes over and betrays him because love slows the system. It releases oxytocin. It softens the amygdala's threat response. It quiets the sympathetic nervous system that's been on high alert since childhood. And in those moments, the avoidant man's greatest fear is no longer being abandoned. It's being fully seen and still chosen. That's why you'll notice the way his hands linger on your face, the way his fingers trace the edges of your skin like a blind man memorizing something he believes he'll never get to touch again, the way his lips hesitate, not because of uncertainty, but because what he's about to do means more than a physical act. It's a psychological surrender, a dropping of the guard that feels like stepping naked into a battlefield with no armor. Most people misunderstand this hesitation as distance or disengagement, when in reality it's the most intimate, raw, and sacred confession an avoidant man will ever make, because he's telling you without words, without performance, without manipulation, I see you, and for the first time I want to be seen too. And in those seconds, something ancient in his nervous system rewrites itself, because love forces a man like him to confront the part of himself he's buried for decades. The little boy who once reached for someone and got left behind, the teenager who decided closeness was weakness, the man who made vows to himself in the dead of night that no one would ever get that close again. And yet here he is, hand trembling, breath uneven, gaze flickering, because the gravity of you is undoing him. The slowing down is the first sign, because it's the one thing he can't fake. It's not a strategy, It's a survival reflex malfunctioning in the presence of real love, and no matter how detached, how practiced, how cold he's been before, his brain and body know when the connection is different, when it threatens to burn away his defenses and expose the raw, terrified, beautiful thing underneath. It's in the way he lets you guide the pace, in the way his usual urgency dissolves into something softer, something more tentative, something rooted not in desire for release, but in the desperate, silent need to hold this moment in his hands for as long as possible because he knows he's experiencing something his mind told him he'd never find. Every second he slows down, every moment he lingers where he normally would have rushed, every glance he holds for a breath longer than usual is a rebellion against his own attachment wounds, a silent declaration that for once he's willing to risk everything his survival brain screams at him to protect because what he feels in that moment is bigger than the fear. It's not the kind of love you see in movies. It's the kind of love forged in the blood and bone of people who swore they'd never open themselves again and yet find themselves kneeling in front of someone who makes them forget why they ever built walls in the first place. And you'll see it in the way time seems to stretch between you, in the way moments last longer than they should, not because he's thinking about it, but because his system is fighting to delay the inevitable end of a moment where he isn't lonely, where he isn't pretending, where he isn't armored. The slowing down is an act of worship, not of you alone, but of what you represent. The impossible possibility that someone might actually love the parts of him he deemed unlovable. And in those seconds of hesitation, in those lingering touches, in that softened breathing, the avoidant man is more vulnerable than he's ever been in his life. The most revealing proof of an avoidant man's real love doesn't happen in the middle of the act. It happens in the aftermath, in those silent, raw, unguarded moments where his carefully constructed defenses are no longer being actively managed, where his brain, flooded with chemicals it spent years resisting, betrays the story he's told himself about not needing anyone, not wanting closeness, not trusting love. And that's the moment most people misinterpret because they don't understand the battlefield happening inside him. When an avoidant man makes love to someone he doesn't care about, the aftermath is routine. It's detached. It's a quick retreat to his armor, his phone, the television, anything to create distance from a moment of exposure. But when love is real, when it's genuine, his nervous system doesn't allow him to run the way it normally does. In fact, it locks him down. It floods his bloodstream with oxytocin, dopamine, vasopressin, serotonin, the very neurochemicals responsible for human attachment. And for a man who's built his identity around emotional self-sufficiency and avoidant detachment, this chemical cocktail feels like a foreign invasion. His sympathetic nervous system, conditioned by trauma or abandonment or betrayal, would typically trigger a shutdown, an exit, a sudden emotional coldness masked as casual indifference. But when love is genuine, his body betrays him. His nervous system doesn't activate the flight response. Instead, it freezes in a kind of stunned, wordless awe, and that's why you'll notice he gets quiet. It's not disinterest, it's not rejection, it's not detachment. It's overwhelm. His system is so unaccustomed to the hormonal flood of connection that his mind hasn't yet built a defense mechanism for it. And what's happening in those silent moments is an entire identity being questioned. Everything he believed about himself, about love, about people, about connection, begins to unravel in his own mind. He lays there silent not because he has nothing to say, but because there are no words for the collision of fear, awe, gratitude, and terror happening beneath his skin. You see, an avoidant man was taught by pain or experience that attachment is danger. Love equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals annihilation, and so his entire psychological infrastructure is designed to avoid those states, to protect himself from ever needing someone too deeply, ever depending on anyone for his sense of safety, ever exposing his underbelly to a person capable of betrayal. But when real love invades, it rewires that infrastructure against his will. His brain, awash with the aftermath of genuine connection, is being chemically told that safety exists in closeness, that presence can be trusted, that another human being might not abandon him when he's most exposed, and that realization is so foreign, so violently opposite to everything his survival brain believes, that the only response is silence, not cold silence, shaken silence, a sacred, delicate quiet where he's trying to process the impossible. Most people panic in this moment, mistaking it for withdrawal. But what they fail to realize is that this quiet is the most honest thing he's ever offered. It's a wordless confession that he doesn't know how to reconcile what he feels with what he thought was true. And while his words fail him, his body tells the truth. His breathing slows irregularly, the muscles around his jaw soften, the tension in his shoulders begins to release in spasms he won't even notice because his nervous system is switching from hypervigilant to vulnerable. He isn't thinking of what to say, he's confronting the terrifying idea that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong about love. And for a man whose entire identity was built on the certainty that independence was his only safe state, that revelation is earth-shattering. You'll feel it in the way his hand lingers on your skin, in the way his gaze flickers to you and away, in the way his body seeks proximity but hesitates to ask for it out loud, because voicing a need has always equated to exposing weakness. That silence isn't distance, it's the noise of a heart learning a new language. And while he lies there, paralyzed between instinct and desire, he's recalibrating. He's measuring his old beliefs against the reality of how he feels in that moment and finding them incompatible. This isn't something he can intellectualize. It's a primitive, biological, neurochemical experience his brain hasn't adapted to handle. And so it immobilizes him. Because if he admits to himself how deeply he feels, if he acknowledges the weight of what just happened, he knows it will alter the way he lives, the way he loves, the way he protects himself. And that post-intimacy quiet is him standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the terrifying unknown of what life would mean if he allowed himself to stay open, to stay connected, to need, to trust. Most people don't realize that for an avoidant man, love isn't a gradual warming up. It's an ambush. It overtakes him in one moment, in one act, in one gaze, and it leaves him stunned, searching for the walls he suddenly doesn't want to rebuild. That's why he won't speak. Because to speak would be to admit to both himself and you that something irreversible happened, and admitting it makes it real. In those moments of silence, he's remembering every scar that warned him against this, every moment of betrayal that proved to him love wasn't safe, and yet simultaneously, his body is screaming the opposite, flooded with the biology of attachment and warmth. That contradiction is unbearable, and so he says nothing, because no language exists for a man fighting a war between his mind and his biology. And that silence, as heavy and complicated as it is the clearest signal of genuine love. Because if it meant nothing, if it were just pleasure or ego, he'd be back to his detachment routine, his casual conversation, his emotional distance. But the fact that he's leveled by it, rendered wordless and wide-eyed in his own skull, is proof that he's experiencing something bigger than fear, something more powerful than conditioning, something worth the terror it brings. And in that raw, electric quiet, you'll find the truth no one else will ever see. That the man who swore he'd never need anyone just met the one person capable of making him question everything he thought was keeping him safe. The rarest, most sacred act of love an avoidant man can offer isn't what he does to you during intimacy. It's what he lets you do to him in those fragile, unguarded moments when every wall he's built begins to crumble under the weight of a connection he can't deny. Because for a man conditioned by fear, abandonment, and emotional starvation, letting anyone touch the parts of him he's kept armored isn't an act of casual affection. It's a surrender so profound it terrifies him more than any heartbreak ever could. And while the world teaches us to watch for what a man gives, the real proof of his love lies in what he allows himself to receive, because an avoidant man's entire survival has been built on control, on keeping his vulnerability hidden, on never being the one who's held, who's seen, who's cradled like something fragile and irreplaceable. And when love is genuine, when the connection pierces deeper than pleasure or routine, you'll find him hesitating in ways he doesn't understand, his body torn between centuries of genetic memory screaming for detachment and the silent, primal itch to finally be safe in someone's arms, and that conflict shows itself in the simplest, most devastatingly honest moments. When he lets you touch his face, not the practiced, distant kind of touch, but the slow, gentle trace of your fingers across the skin he's spent a lifetime hardening, and you'll see it in the way his breath catches, not because he's aroused, but because the innocence of that contact reminds some buried part of him of what he lost long ago, the kind of tenderness that doesn't ask for anything in return. And though he won't say it out loud, his body tells you everything, the way his eyes flicker closed when your hand moves through his hair, the way his head instinctively leans into your touch, even though his conscious mind resists. Because no one told you that for a man like this, touch has always been a weapon, a transaction, and a means of control, and letting you hold him isn't physical, it's spiritual. It's him stepping into the most dangerous territory of all, needing. And what most people never realize is that needing isn't weakness for a man like him. It's trauma, it's memory, it's the echo of every time he reached out as a boy and found nothing there, every time love arrived with conditions, every time safety was promised and stolen, and when he lets you cradle him, stroke his face, hold him against you without expectation or demand, it breaks something inside him in the most beautiful way, because for the first time since he built those walls, he realizes not everyone who touches you means to take something, and you'll feel it in the way his body hesitates before it melts, in the way he stiffens then surrenders, because his nervous system is recalibrating in real time, fighting against everything it was taught to believe about closeness and finding impossibly that maybe, just maybe, this is what it was meant for. And no one warns you how profound this moment, because it doesn't look like fireworks. It doesn't look like grand declarations. It looks like silence, trembling, the way his fingers grip your wrist, as if anchoring himself to a world where this kind of tenderness can exist without danger. And what's happening inside him isn't something he can explain. It's the flooding of oxytocin telling his brain he's safe, the reduction of cortisol loosening the knots in his stomach, the melting of decades-old trauma stored in his chest, his shoulders, his throat, and though he won't speak it, you'll feel the apology in the way he leans into you, as if sorry for every time he denied himself this kind of peace, and every second he stays in your arms is an act of rebellion against the story he's lived by, a story where needing makes you weak, where love is a liability, where connection is a trap, and in those fragile, wordless minutes, he is more naked than he's ever been in his life, because the danger isn't in losing you, it's in losing the version of himself who believed he didn't deserve to be held. And what's even harder is that he knows once he's experienced this, he can't go back, can't fully return to the cold, detached existence he thought kept him safe, because now his body remembers, his heart remembers, and though his mind will fight it, there's a part of him that'll hate you for it forever, because what no one teaches you is that touch isn't just physical for a man like this. It's memory, it's medicine, it's the closest thing he'll ever feel to salvation. And in that trembling surrender, when he lets you hold him, you're not just holding his body, you're holding the boy he buried, the man he armored, the hope he never admitted he had, and though he might pull away after, though his fear might drag him back behind his walls, those minutes are proof that love, real love, reached him in a place no one else ever could. And the rarest thing you'll ever witness is an avoidant man being held, not because he needs it, not because he asked for it, but because in that impossible moment, he finally let himself be human. And that is the kind of love that changes the architecture of a heart forever.